Good day and welcome to the Eastern Cape's virtual lessons. Today's virtual lesson will be on the eye and the ear, and we'll be looking at particularly the consequences of damage to the parts of the eye and the ear. I'm Mrs. Renee Bishop. I'm the Life Sciences Subject Advisor for the BCM District. So let's start by looking at the eye. Our exam guidelines require us to look at both the structure and functioning of parts of the eye using diagrams. We need to understand binocular vision. We need to understand how accommodation and papillary mechanisms work, as well as knowing the nature and treatment of defects such as short-sightedness, long-sightedness, astigmatism, and cataracts. In today's lesson, we are going to concentrate on the structure and functions as part of the eye, especially how defects in these structures can affect vision. We will also look at the visual defects and how these affect sight in the eye. Let's start off by looking at the structure and functioning of the three layers of the eye. The outer part of the eye is the sclera. The sclera is the white layer on the outside that helps to maintain the shape of the eye while protecting the inner parts of the eye. Now, if your sclera is damaged, or becomes infected, it can lead to damage or infection of other parts of the eye, and this could lead to blindness. The choroid is the middle layer of the eye, and the choroid contains pigments that help to absorb excess light that enters into the eye. Now, excess light can be damaging to the receptors of the eye because it means that they are overstimulated by all the light that is found in the eye, and this can lead to blindness. The retina is the inner layer of the eye, and the retina is where your sense receptors for light are found. Now remember that there are two types of sense receptors. There are the cone cells, which are stimulated by high light intensity, and they allow us to see intense, bright, and color vision. Now the loss of cones would mean the loss of color vision. It would also cause a blind spot at the back of the eye when we are looking straight ahead. And the reason for this is that at the back of the eye, we find the yellow spot. Now remember, the yellow spot is the area where there are only cones found, and that is the area where we experience the clearest vision. So if our cones are damaged, it means that our yellow spot is going to be damaged, and we will no longer be able to see the light that is coming in from directly in front of us. Rods, on the other hand, are receptor cells that are stimulated by low light intensity, and they allow us to see black and white vision. Now remember, the rods are found on the periphery of our eye. Okay, they're found on the sides here, not at the back. And therefore, if the rods are damaged, it will mean the loss of peripheral vision. Okay, so it means that we won't be able to see around the sides. All right, and it will also lead to night blindness. Now, the reason for the night blindness is because at night the light intensity is very low, and it's the rods that help us to pick up that very low light intensity. Now let us look at the parts of the eye that are responsible for vision. The eye needs to receive and convert a stimulus into an impulse and then transmit that impulse to the cerebrum of the brain where it will be interpreted. The photoreceptors in the eye are the rods and the cones which are found on the inner layer known as the retina. Now light is reflected off an object. This light that is reflected off the object enters the eye through the cornea. In the cornea, the light gets refracted, which means it is bent slightly. It then passes through the aqueous humor, through the pupil, and through the lens where it is refracted more. The light then passes through the vitreous humor in the inner part of the eye, and then it is focused on the retina, where the rods and cones pick up the light stimulus and convert it into a nerve impulse. This nerve impulse is then sent through the optic nerve to the cerebrum of the brain, where the sensation of sight is interpreted by the cerebrum. Now, if any part of this pathway is disrupted, it means that the image form will not be properly interpreted by your cerebrum. So let's look at damage that may be caused along this pathway. The first structure in the pathway to the formation of an image is the cornea. Your cornea is the clear outer covering of the front of the eye, and it is responsible for refracting light rays in order to help focus them on the retina. Now, your cornea needs to be very smooth and evenly curved. So it needs to have a very smooth curve in the front. If the cornea is unevenly curved, it's going to lead to astigmatism. So let's look at what astigmatism is. What happens in astigmatism is light rays that move through the cornea are normally refracted and focused on one particular point. But with astigmatism, the light rays are refracted in different directions. Therefore, the light rays will not all be focused on the same point at the back of the retina. This will lead to a blurred image. So instead of one clear image being formed, we get a number of focal points where the light focuses at different points on the retina, and this will create a number of blurred images being formed. Astigmatism can be treated in the beginning by wearing spectacles, but more effectively, it can be treated with surgery, where the front part of the cornea is smoothed out using a laser. The next part of the eye that the light travels through is the iris. Now, the iris controls the amount of light that enters the eye by controlling the size of the pupil, and this is done through the pupillary mechanism. So as the iris contracts and relaxes its muscles, it will change the size of the pupil. If the iris is damaged, it means that too much or too little light will enter into the eye. If there's too much light, this will cause damage to other parts of the eye, especially the receptor cells that are found in the retina. This damage to the receptor cells can lead to partial or complete blindness. The next part of the eye is the lens. The lens is responsible for refracting light rays that enter the eye to focus them on the retina. Now, the shape of the lens can be changed to focus the light for near or far vision. If the lens becomes cloudy, it will result in cataracts. This occurs when light cannot pass through the lens and causes a blurred image to be formed. The lens can also lose its ability to change shape. And if it loses its ability to change shape, it means that it can no longer focus light on the back of the eye. Let's look more closely at the consequences of this damage. Let's have a look at how cataracts will affect vision. What will happen if cataracts develops in the lens? Because the lens will become cloudy, or another word we can use is opaque, which means that light does not pass through the lens effectively. The less light will therefore enter into the eye. This will cause a loss of vision because not enough light enters into the eye and stimulates the receptors on the retina. Therefore, a clear image cannot be formed. Cataracts can be treated in the beginning using spectacles, but as the cataracts develop, surgery will be required where they remove the lens and replace it with an artificial lens. Now let's look at what will happen if the lens cannot change shape. Now remember, it's important that the lens changes shape so that it can focus the light on the retina at the back of the eye in order to form a clear image. If the lens cannot flatten, which means that the lens will be too bulged or too convex, it means that light rays moving through the lens will be refracted too much. The light rays will focus before the retina, and therefore a blurred image will be formed on the retina. Now, can you explain what will happen if the lens is too flat? Remember to use the example that we've just used above in order to explain this event. So now it's over to you as we pause while you think of how to answer this question. Right, let's get back to how to answer if the lens is too flat. If it's too flat, light rays moving through the lens will not be refracted enough. Therefore, light rays will focus behind the retina and a blurred image will be formed on the retina. This is what happens in long-sightedness and short-sightedness. In long-sightedness, the lens cannot become convex enough. It cannot bulge enough, and therefore it does not refract the light enough, and light therefore focuses behind the retina. Okay? This can be corrected by using a convex lens. A convex lens will bend light inwards so that now the light will focus on the retina and a clear image can be formed. In short-sightedness, the lens cannot flatten enough, and this means that the light is going to be focused before the retina, causing a blurred image to be formed on the retina. This can be corrected using concave lenses. Concave lenses bend light outwards so that it refracts more slowly and therefore the light focuses on the retina at the back of the eye. Let's practice a question on the eye. Let's try answering the following questions. In the diagram below, it shows a defective eye structure. Firstly, you need to identify the eye defect that is shown in the diagram, right? Noticing that the image is forming behind the retina. Number two, by referring to the diagram, explain how the structural defects shown in the diagram cause the eye condition mentioned in number one. And thirdly, state one way in which this condition can be corrected. Let's pause for a few seconds while you answer these questions. Right, so let's see. How do we identify the eye defect shown in the diagram? We can see in the diagram that the image forms behind the retina. That means that the light, okay, is only focusing after the retina. Now that means that the light is not being bent enough. And that means that images that are nearby or close by, like this object, all right, cannot be seen clearly. So if we cannot see a close object, but we will be able to see a faraway object, that means that this image is showing us long-sightedness. Now, using this diagram, we need to explain how the structural defects, in other words, the defect in the lens and the eye shape, right, cause the condition mentioned here. Now, firstly, the eyeball is too rounded, it's too short, and the lens cannot become more convex. This causes the image of a near object to fall on the retina, that falls on the retina, to be blurred, while the clear image is formed behind the retina. Number 3, state one way in which this condition can be corrected. Now remember, we can correct both short-sightedness and long-sightedness using glasses. We need to decide, do we use a concave lens or a convex lens to correct this image? Now, we need the light rays to be focused on the retina. So therefore, we need to bend the light rays more or refract the light rays more so that they focus on the retina. So which lens will refract light rays more? You're correct. It would be a convex lens. A convex lens would bend the light rays inwards, refracting them more so that they can be focused on the back of the retina. Here's a very interesting question that came up in a past end of the year exam paper. The question asked us to describe how a blurred image forms if a person with normal vision wears spectacles with biconvex lenses while reading a book. Now remember, a book is a close object, so therefore it will be near vision. Now what happens in near vision is that light needs to be refracted. But in this case, the lenses of the spectacles will also be refracting the light rays. The lens of the eye also refracts the light rays. And this means that the light rays will be focused in front of the retina because the light rays are refracted too much. In other words, the light rays are bent too much, and instead of focusing on the retina at the back of the eye, they will form before the retina, and therefore the image formed on the retina will be blurred. The last part of the eye involved in the formation of the image is the optic nerve. Now, the optic nerve's function is to transmit impulses from the eye to the cerebrum of the brain, where the impulses will be interpreted as an image. Therefore, if the optic nerve is damaged, no impulses will be sent to the cerebrum. Therefore, there will be no interpretation of light, which will lead to the loss of sight. In other words, blindness. So the optic nerve is vital for transmitting those impulses from the rods and cones, the receptors, to the cerebrum of the brain. Here's a final practice problem for you on the functions of the parts of the eye. Number 1, in some cases where people are blind, the condition is caused by cataracts. Explain why people with cataracts may become blind, and state one way in which cataracts can be treated. Number 2, explain why long-sighted people need to wear glasses with biconvex lenses as a corrective measure. Remember how we explained what happens to light rays as they enter the eye and which structures bend or refract the light ray to focus them on the back of the eye. Name a visual defect that is characterized by an uneven cornea or lens. So now let's pause and it's over to you to answer these questions. Let's see how you've done. Firstly, let's explain why people with cataracts may become blind. The reason for this is the lens becomes opaque or milky or cloudy. These are all words we can use to explain the condition of the lens. Because of this, light cannot travel through the lens to the retina, and this would cause a person to become blind. Number 1.2, how can this condition be treated? Cataracts are effectively treated through surgery. It is a very simple surgical procedure where patients go in for day care, all right, and within a day they can be sent home and be able to see again. Number 2, explain why long-sighted people need to wear glasses with biconvex lenses. The reason for this is that the lens is less convex, or the eyeball is too short, or it may be caused by a cornea that is too flat. This means that light is not being bent enough. Therefore, it causes the light rays to form behind the retina. A biconvex lens increases the refractive power of the eye. In other words, it causes the eye to bend the light more. Therefore, light rays will be focused on the retina to form a clear image. Number 3, the visual defect that is characterized by an uneven cornea or lens. This is known as astigmatism. I hope you've enjoyed the eye, and now we're going to carry on to the ear and look at how the ear is effective if structures are damaged. Let's have a look to consequences of structures damaged in the ear. Our exam guidelines on the ear require us to look at the structure and functioning of the ear using a diagram. It requires us to understand the functioning that these parts play in hearing and balance, and how middle ear infection and deafness is caused and treated. In today's lesson, we will concentrate on structures and how the damage to these structures can affect both hearing and balance. We will also look at how middle ear infection and deafness are affected. To understand the consequences of damage in the ear, it is important for us to understand the pathway of sound through the ear. For us to understand the consequences of damage to structures in the ear, it's very important that we first understand the pathway of sound as it moves through the ear. Now, the ear consists of three parts: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. In the outer ear, it is the pinna that collects the sound waves from the environment and channels them into the auditory canal. The auditory canal conducts the sound waves towards the tympanic membrane, and these sound waves cause the tympanic membrane to vibrate. So the sound waves are converted into vibrations of the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is the start of the middle ear. Those vibrations of the tympanic membrane are then passed on to the ossicles and then to the oval window. Now, it is the role of the ossicles to amplify those vibrations. What we mean by this is that the ossicles cause the vibrations to get bigger. Right? In other words, they're increasing the sound. Right? They're making the sound louder. So the ossicles get smaller and smaller as they go along. The hammer is the largest of the ossicles, and then the anvil is smaller and the stirrup is the smallest of them. So each time those vibrations are passed from one ossicle to the next, the vibration gets larger and larger. And this is very important, as otherwise the sound that reaches the inner ear would be very soft. So the ossicles ensure that the sound is amplified. Those vibrations are then passed on to the oval window. Right, so let's recap here. The outer ear passes sound waves to the middle ear. In the middle ear, sound waves are converted to sound vibrations. They are no longer sound waves, they are sound vibrations, and these are passed to the oval window. These vibrations in the oval window are then passed on to the inner ear. Now remember that the inner ear is filled with fluid. The fluid is the perilymph and the endolymph. Although we don't need to know these names, all right, it helps us to understand where the vibrations are moving. So the vibrations of the oval window are then passed on to the fluid in the cochlea. Now these vibrations are then converted into pressure waves in the cochlear fluid. These pressure waves in the fluid stimulate the hair cells of the organ of Corti. These receptor cells take the stimulus and convert it into a nerve impulse. That nerve impulse is sent on the auditory nerve to the cerebrum of the brain. So let's recap. Sound waves in the outer ear are converted to sound vibrations in the middle ear. These sound vibrations are converted to pressure waves in the inner ear fluid. These pressure waves are picked up by the receptor cells, which are the organ of Corti, and they are converted to nerve impulses. And these nerve impulses are sent to the cerebrum of the brain. Now, damage to any one of these parts of the ear is going to mean that either the sound waves, vibrations, or pressure waves are not transferred to the organ of Corti and are not converted to nerve impulses to go to the cerebrum. So let's look at how damage to any of these parts of the ear can affect hearing. What would happen if your tympanic membrane would not vibrate freely or your eardrum has burst? This means that the vibrations from the outer ear would not be passed on to the ossicles. Therefore, the ossicles would pass on less or no vibrations to the oval window, and less or no pressure waves would be formed in the perilymph and endolymph. There would be less or no stimulation of the hair cells of the organ of Corti, and sound interpreted by the cerebrum. This would lead to a loss of hearing. So you can see if the tympanic membrane is affected, all the other steps in the hearing process would not be able to take place and therefore would lead to a loss of hearing. Now, let's see if you can do the next one. Over to you. What if the ossicles were fused or missing? How would this affect hearing? A question like this was asked in this year's June exam paper, where otosclerosis is a medical condition that prevents the ossicles from vibrating, and candidates were asked to explain how this condition would affect hearing. We're going to pause here for a few minutes where you think about how you would explain this. Okay, let's have a look at how to explain this. If the ossicles were fused or couldn't vibrate, the vibrations from the tympanic membrane would not be passed through the air-filled middle ear to the oval window. There would be no amplification occurring as the ossicles cannot amplify it. No or less vibrations will be transmitted to the oval window, and no or less pressure waves will be created in the fluid of the cochlea. There will be no or less stimulation of the organ of Corti, and no impulses would reach the cerebrum. This would lead to hearing loss. As you can see, we follow the same pathway each time we explain any of these scenarios, starting at the point that is affected by the damage. What would happen if the oval window cannot vibrate? If it cannot vibrate, no pressure waves will be created in the fluid in the cochlea. The hair cells of the organ of Corti will not be stimulated. Therefore, the stimulus will not be converted to an impulse, and no impulse will be sent on the auditory nerve to the cerebrum, and this will lead to hearing loss or deafness. Now it's over to you again. Try to explain the effect if the receptors in region C, which is the cochlea, are damaged. We'll pause while you come up with your answer. If the receptors are damaged, the receptors cannot convert the stimulus to an impulse. Therefore, no impulses are transmitted to the cerebrum, and this will lead to hearing loss or deafness. I hope you have understood how to explain the damage to the parts of the pathway in the process of hearing. If you understand the process of hearing, you'll be able to understand how any damage along the way will affect hearing and cause hearing loss. Another important part in the ear, but that is not directly involved in the hearing process, is the Eustachian tube. Now, the Eustachian tube is a small tubule that runs from the back of your pharynx up into the middle ear. Remembering that the middle ear is a fluid-filled cavity inside your ear. It is important for the air pressure inside the middle ear to be equal to the air pressure on the outer ear. This is important so that the tympanic membrane can vibrate freely. If the pressure is not equal between the outer ear and the middle ear, the tympanic membrane will not be able to vibrate freely, and therefore the vibrations will not be freely passed on to the middle ear and to the inner ear. So the Eustachian tube allows air to move up into the middle ear, right, equalizing the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. What would be the effect on hearing if the Eustachian tube is blocked or there's excess mucus built up in the Eustachian tube? This often occurs when a person has middle ear infection. Because of the bacteria that are causing the middle ear infection, mucus tends to build up in the Eustachian tube. This blocks the Eustachian tube so that air cannot move up the Eustachian tube. The Eustachian tube would be therefore blocked due to the infection. The ear will not be able to equalize the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. Therefore, there would be a greater or different pressure in the middle ear than the outer ear. The tympanic membrane would not be able to vibrate freely. This would lead to hearing loss and can cause the tympanic membrane to burst. Let us have a look at another question on the ear. In this question, we're given a picture of the ear and we're asked to explain why a buildup of wax in part A may result in a temporary hearing loss. Now, if we look here, part A is your tympanic membrane, and wax often builds up here in the outer ear and pushes against the tympanic membrane, and that prevents your tympanic membrane from vibrating. So the answer in this case is part A, the tympanic membrane will not be able to vibrate freely. No or less vibrations will be passed into the middle ear or to the ossicles. So in other words, vibrations that are caused by the sound waves hitting the tympanic membrane will not be passed into this middle ear, and that will result in hearing loss. Now remember that this hearing loss will be temporary because once we remove the wax, right, the tympanic membrane will again vibrate freely. Now, this question was only for 2 marks, but it could have easily been a 4 or 5-mark question if we had to answer it fully. So therefore we can say, if it was a 4-mark question, we would answer it as Part A, the tympanic membrane will not be able to vibrate freely. Less or no vibrations will be carried to the middle ear. The oval window will not vibrate, okay, and create pressure waves in the cochlea. The organ of Corti will not be stimulated, and no impulse will be sent to the cerebrum. When the wax is removed, the tympanic membrane will then be able to vibrate freely again, and hearing will be restored. So we need to realize that the number of marks can vary for these questions, right? Always answer this question as fully as possible rather than writing a short answer, as you don't know which points they are looking for in the answer. So if you get a question like this, I would answer it fully, explaining the whole pathway of hearing and explaining why the hearing loss will only be temporary. In the next question, they asked if a grommet is a small device that allows the air to move into and out of the middle ear. This prevents pressure buildup in the middle ear. Explain how a grommet is used in the treatment of middle ear infections to prevent hearing loss. Now, a grommet is a small little plastic device like this, and it's inserted on the tympanic membrane. So this is your tympanic membrane, and what happens is they make a hole in your tympanic membrane and they put the grommet through. Now this allows air to move into your middle ear, right, freely, and so it can balance the pressure on either side of this tympanic membrane. Grommets are mostly used in children that suffer from middle ear infection. Remember, in middle ear infection, your eustachian tube is often blocked with mucus, so air cannot move up the eustachian tube. And that means that if air can't move up the eustachian tube, it can't equalize the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane, right, which would mean that the eardrum or tympanic membrane would not be able to vibrate. Now, if this pressure builds up too much in the middle ear, it can push on the tympanic membrane too hard, and that would cause the tympanic membrane to burst. So let's see how we would answer this question. The middle ear infection causes fluid buildup in the middle ear, which would block the eustachian tube. The grommets will release pressure that will build up in the middle ear, or we can say it will drain the fluid from the middle ear as well. And therefore, the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane is equalized. Now remember, it's not the pressure on either side of the ear, all right, because the ear consists of 3 parts. It's the pressure on either side of your tympanic membrane, the outer ear and the middle ear. So I hope you have a good understanding now of how different parts of the ear can be affected and how the process of hearing can be affected. There are other devices that can be used to correct deafness. Let's look at how these are used and in which circumstances. So the first device that can correct deafness is the hearing aid. The hearing aid is a small microphone that picks up the sound waves that come into the ear. The hearing aid amplifies the sound waves. So in other words, the hearing aid does the same job as the ossicles in amplifying the sound waves. Those amplified sound waves are making the sound louder so that they can be more easily picked up by the organs of Corti and the cochlea, and therefore more likely that an impulse will be sent to the cerebrum. So a hearing aid can only solve hearing problems that involve the amount of vibrations or the size of the vibrations that are sent to the cochlea, right? For instance, if your ossicles are damaged and the vibrations are not amplified by the ossicles. The other device that is used to correct hearing defects is the cochlear implant. Now, cochlear implant can be used when the organs of corti or receptors in the cochlea are damaged and therefore cannot pick up the stimulus and convert it to an impulse. So your cochlea consists of a processor on the outside which is connected to a transmitter. On the inside, there's electric coils, right, that transmit electrical signals into the cochlea. So what happens is that microphones in this processor on the outside, right, pick up the sound waves and transfer them to the transmitter, which converts the information into digital information. This information is then transferred through the coil to the implant under the skin. The implant sends electrical signals down the electrode and into your cochlea. These electrical signals stimulate the nerve fibers in the cochlea, which creates an impulse in the nerve fibers that are then sent to the cerebrum in the brain to be interpreted as sound. So your cochlear implant is taking the place of the receptors or the organs of corti in the cochlea. Right? They are not there to correct other defects in the ear, such as the ossicles not vibrating, the eardrum that is damaged, or other parts that are not working effectively. As we can see, your hearing aid and your cochlear implant are correcting different parts of the hearing process. I hope this has helped you to understand the hearing process more and that you are more familiar with defects that occur in the eye and the ear. Carry on practicing on past papers, and you'll see that the way that these questions are answered are very much in the way that we have practiced throughout this video. Good luck with your further studies.